Hi, I'm Nikki, and on the other side is Suman Raghunathan. We are live from New York. The topic of discussion in this broadcast is DACA, which is the abbreviation for the program that Trump has pulled the plug on, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's an Obama-era legacy, and what we are trying to do with this broadcast is to put into context what it means for Indians specifically. A lot of what it means for the 800,000 people will be similar, but since our audiences are essentially Indians all over the world, we'll try and put it in context, what it means for them, how many are really affected. There are lots of numbers floating around. The Press Trust of India has put out about 8,000 roundabouts. And in SALT's press release, I saw a number that says 5,500. I understand, and we all understand that because there are gray areas here, lots of them. We cannot get exact numbers. That's fine, but we need to know what is the real effect here? Who are the people getting affected? Where are these children? Are they in colleges, schools? Does it mean they have to kind of leave something halfway and head home? And to head home where? Because this is pretty much home for these people. So we'll try and get Suman to speak on those issues. I'll hand it over. Suman, give us the numbers, give us the context.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today. Unfortunately, this is at a tragic moment for so many South Asian, in particular, of course, Indian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi immigrant communities in the United States, as well as their families globally. The DACA program, which, as Nikki mentioned, is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, was really a Band-Aid that the Obama administration put into place after years of courageous mobilizations on the part of what we call dreamers. Those are young people who are currently in the US, who are undocumented, who would normally, at a time of sanity, be eligible for a bill that was introduced more than 15 years ago called the DREAM Act, right? Which would allow young people who were brought to the US at a very young age and often by their families, and grew up in the U.S., to be, by all other considerations, American, would in turn allow those young people to be protected from deportation and to be able to legally work in the U.S. and hopefully eventually obtain U.S. citizenship. The DACA program was put into place in 2012 by the Obama administration because Congress failed to pass the DREAM Act, which has been introduced essentially annually since 2001. The numbers that we have right now are, in general, both culled from the State Department as well as the Department of Homeland Security, and to some extent by interviews and confidential data that academics have been able to put together for us and other advocates. The numbers that we have so far are that there are roughly 5,500 Indians and Pakistanis who have already applied for and obtained DACA status, right? So those are people who have already gone through all the hoops to be able to get protection on a revolving or renewable 2-year basis.
So, I'll just stop you for a moment there. I'll just stop you for a moment so you can continue with some additional numbers. So that's exactly what I wanted to know. When you say about 27,000 Asian Americans get affected, and of that, including 5,500 Indians and Pakistanis, does it mean 5,500 plus? Does it mean only Indians are 5,500, or does it mean the India-Pak total is 5,500 or thereabouts? What does this mean?
Sure. The India-Pakistan total combined is 5,500.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
And then moving forward with those numbers, what we know is that a huge cross-section of young people, dreamers, if you will, from India in particular, as well as Pakistan, are eligible for DACA, but have not yet applied for or received that status. So we know there are an extra 17,000 young people from India alone and an additional 6,000 young people from Pakistan who are eligible for DACA, but have not applied or have not yet received that status. You may be wondering, go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, just a thought, since you said there are these 17,000 people, and that really deserves some focus. Reason is, we all know what it is like to stand in a DMV line. Okay, so we all know what it could have meant when, let's say, somebody yesterday decided that today I'm going to apply for DACA. Nobody knew. Okay, we some of us knew that Trump's announcement will come on September 5th. But let's say by 5 p.m. yesterday, they couldn't finish the paperwork.
Right.
Where do they stand today?
Right. They stand in limbo, and they do not have any real protection, as far as we can tell, from deportation. I think that there are a number of so-called assurances that we've received from the Department of Homeland Security, which is the primary federal agency that is tasked with both processing applications for programs such as DACA, as well as at the same time enforcing, often what we've seen over the last 7 months or so, in an increasingly punitive way, our nation's immigration laws, right? So the same agency that is processing applications is at the same time, through another arm, putting people into deportation proceedings, right? So I think when you look at the reasons why folks have not yet applied from our community in particular for DACA, you have a number of reasons, right? The first question that you raised, Nikki, is I think a point well taken around questions around confidentiality of the data that people put out there when they essentially declare to the federal government that they are undocumented, right? Which in and of itself is a very scary process to go through. I think the other piece that is incredibly important and specific to South Asian immigrant communities in the U.S., in particular communities from originally from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and many other communities, is there was a very specific backlash against our communities immediately after September 11th through a program called the National Security Entry-Exit Registration System, or Special Registration, which was a program that was trained literally upon our communities immediately after September 11th in a supposed search for quote-unquote terrorist actors and or elements. Those programs required over 80,000 men, Muslim men from a specific list of countries to register with the federal government, right? Resulting in about 80,000, in fact, 83,000 individuals being deported back to their home countries, which at the same time resulted in 0 terrorism-related convictions. So our community's memories of registering with the federal government, which is essentially the same thing that is required via the DACA program, has not been a pleasant memory for our communities, which has undoubtedly resulted in widespread deportations for our communities, as well as the continued surveillance of many South Asian communities in the U.S., including South Asian Muslim communities in the U.S., under the guise of government protection, if you will. So, and then the final piece that I'll just say is that the experience of many South Asian documented youth, including those who were originally born in India, who are not Muslim, but who have been in the U.S. for the vast majority of their lives, has been that they have, even when they have applied for DACA or applied for renewal for their DACA status, is that they have been held up in a very, very long line, supposedly based upon our conversations with the federal government, including in the prior administration, supposedly by virtue of a national security question, right? These are young people who clearly pose no security threat, but who are nonetheless held up in a limbo simply by virtue of what they look like or where they were originally born.
Yeah, and also I think implicit, Suman, it's not explicitly stated, implicit in all this, what I read of what Trump has said on DACA, etc., and what Sessions has said is, it's not just about these young people, it's also about their parents. See, they just don't land up, okay? They land up with someone. Mm-hmm. So it's complex. I mean, I know someone, and I cannot name them, and I'm sure there are lots of people who come to you and you can't name them. Where this lady and her husband, this lady and the child came in on a tourist visa. The lady and the child are on the tourist visa. The father was working here already, and they overstayed. Okay. Now it can be as simple as that. It can be a little different, but apportioning blame based on rules is one thing, and then what Obama did was out of compassion, essentially. Because every case is different. But tell us, when people are coming to you, let's say yesterday, today, what are they asking for? What are you, let's say, able to do for them as an advocacy group? Where do they go next? Do they go to the lawyers then?
It's a really hard question, and I will be honest with you. I mean, we have continued to grapple with exactly where to channel the requests and the questions that folks have come to us with, right? We are very careful at this moment right now to perhaps not overwhelmingly encourage South Asian undocumented youth or dreamers to go out and protest in the streets, right? Which thousands of incredibly brave young people who are undocumented, who I know personally, have been engaging with, in particular yesterday and for the last nearly 20 years, right? Which is a mark of civil disobedience in this country, and which is literally a decision to put their lives and their bodies on the line to fight for freedom for their communities, for their families, and for all of us, really. I will caution that we continue to let folks know to be very clear of the risks associated with doing so. In a city like New York City, where part of SALT staff is based, or in a city like Washington, D.C., where part of SALT staff is based, there's a little bit more protection because the local police have in general decided to not collaborate with immigration and customs enforcement agents, right? So if a young person is arrested in a very reasonable mark of self-expression and civil disobedience, we have a bit more hope that they will not be turned over to immigration and customs enforcement and in turn be deported.
Yeah, but then, that's like you said, Tacoma Park in Maryland,
right?
And, Manhattan is heavily Democratic. So there are some.
I think what I was continuing to say is that I think politics aside, we know that level of protection is not the case for communities across the country, right? Which is why we're not overwhelmingly encouraging undocumented young people to come out in person and fight back. I think that there are at this moment not a huge number of options, and I'm not providing legal advice here, so I want to be very clear about that. But there are not at this moment a huge number of options for undocumented young people to be able to consult with their lawyers with the quote unquote end of DACA. Now, there are a number of young people who, for example, currently have DACA status that will end at some point in the future. Those young people are, it appears, currently protected, but we do not know for how long. So I think, I am happy to have folks in the U.S. in particular contact us at SALT on our website so that they can get information on contacting a reputable immigration lawyer that we can then connect folks with. But I would caution caution against the appearance that there continue to be a number of options at this moment.
I understand.
For documented youth, which is what we call them.
Okay, a very specific question, Suman. Some of it may be iterative, but I think that'll be useful. So I'm just reading out from the DHS communique. So it says that documents from current beneficiaries, so which means, let's say that there is a DACA beneficiary right now, let's say, young person, maybe in school starting the fall session, let's say. whose benefits expire between September 5 to 2017 and March 5, 2018, which pretty much next spring, that have been accepted as of October 5, 2017, which means they know it's going to expire next spring, so they've applied for renewal.
Right.
These will be accepted, and those of them who are unlucky enough that they did not file early enough, they bear the risk of deportation. Right now, that's as on paper, that's what it is, correct?
Yeah, that is.
Okay, and you're saying that these 5,500 odd people, plus, India, Pakistan specific, it's not a great idea for them to do much right now. That's what you're saying also, right?
I would encourage them to consult an organization like SALT individually and directly before deciding to participate in person in an active civil disobedience. That is perhaps an overabundance of caution on our part, but we want to make sure that we can protect our young people.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell me another thing. So much of these countries' laws are based on jurisprudence and what happens in the courts. Now, when Andrew Cuomo says we will sue, okay, or when California says we will sue, what happens to the youngsters? Obviously, it's some kind of confidence booster for sure. What happens then? What's next?
I think the reality is that their current situation does not change, right? If you are a person who is a dreamer and your DACA status has not been renewed, then you continue to be at risk of deportation. And I would encourage someone who is in that situation to contact a reputable legal services organization or advocacy organization such as SALT or many others to ensure that you have the greatest extent of information as to what your current rights are and what your options might be. Simply having a pending lawsuit without a specific stay in particular from a federal court often does not in and of itself amount to immediate protection for an young person. Now again, there are many other options that might be available to individuals, as you mentioned, based upon of said individuals' circumstances and situations. But it does need to be on a case-by-case basis. And again, I would encourage folks to ensure that they have access to reputable legal counsel. I will unfortunately have to mention that there are any number of individuals across the country who are not reputable lawyers, or are in fact not even lawyers, right? Who are making false promises to individuals, not only in our community, but across the nation, right? Regardless of the language they speak or where they're originally from, promising a green card, promising an option for citizenship or naturalization. And we often find that those promises, if they are made wholesale, are not particularly realistic or responsible. And so, what I can certainly say is that while yesterday's news was incredibly devastating for 800,000 undocumented young people across the country, including many of whom are South Asian, we and many other immigrant rights organizations will continue to fight to protect our young people, to make sure that we can not only fight in the courts, but continue to keep the pressure on Congress and on the White House to make sure that they uphold a set of protections, values, and dignity for individuals in the U.S., regardless of where they were born, regardless of the religion that they practice, and regardless of what they look like. I think the reality here is that the lip service from the current administration around the end to the DACA program being a search for humanity and humane immigration policy is, in fact, the inverse. What we continue to see, and what you have seen echoed in the statements of business leaders, of activists, of people who are affected by the end of the DACA program themselves, is that they have built a future in this country and are estimated to help continue powering the nation's economy forward by over $1 billion in the next decade alone. That's why you have Facebook. That's why you have huge unions. That's why you have tech companies, and why you have small businesses all coming out to urge the administration and the White House to either reconsider their decision, or even better, to actually pass the DREAM Act, which is one piece of a critical host of solutions that we all need for the country as a whole. I think that the DACA program, as I mentioned earlier, was a stopgap measure, right? And documented youth that are leading organizations in this country continue to fight for a piece of legislation that will make a difference to them and their families, including but not limited to the DREAM Act, and including but not limited to a roadmap to citizenship for the other individuals, hundreds of thousands of them, who are undocumented in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Suman. Just to give some context to our viewers once more before we wind down, don't see the actions on DACA in isolation, but actually as part of a much larger move to take immigration back pretty much to the past. Because, if you look at the 1920s and history, American history, you'll find that in 1924, the Immigration Act basically allowed only a 2% increase per ethnic community. And what was that based on? It was based on some 1890 census. So a lot that's going on now has echoes from the past. And we'll put some links, which those of you who are interested in seeing this in the wider arc of history can click on that and take a look. And we'll wind down this conversation here. Thank you so much, Suman. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.